We're so pleased you've chosen to follow our AdoptED podcast. I'm Joe Santagato, the Director of Communications and Public Relations for MARE. And at MARE, we believe that the best way to help introduce the process of adoption from foster care is through education, hence our cutesy little title of AdoptED. The theme for today's show is Pride Month. On our podcast today, we'll be discussing the community support that we provide for LGBTQ youth and families. We'll also have a visit later in the show from Richard Benoit, foster and adoptive parent. Richard will share with us a bit about his journey as an LGBTQ ally, gay father, and his work in supporting youth and families. Without further ado, I'm excited to kick off the show with our opening segment called At the Table. Joining me today at the table is my co-host and Director of Family Support Services and my peer co-leader for LGBTQ education and engagement here at MARE, Diane Tamaz. Welcome, Diane.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Joe.
So, Diane, I had the hardest time putting the show notes together for today, and not because there wasn't enough content, but because there was way too much content. So I'm hoping that you'll help to keep us on track and keep us moving. And since we're now in June, it's Pride Month, so happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
So I thought the best way to start our discussion was to talk about the history that each of us has working within the LGBTQ community, just to give people a sense of what we've been doing and where our passion lies for this work. And then we can talk about the current work with MARE. Does that sound like a good place to start?
Yeah, great. It's good work. I want to hear about it.
Okay. So my bio is a little bit long. I apologize in advance. But first, let me just say, as a gay adoptive father of 7 children from foster care with over 2 decades of volunteering with DCF and affiliates, that I have a pretty wide lens into this work. And so I tend to look at it very globally when we talk about LGBTQ youth and families. And I know you're much the same. So my grassroots work goes back to when I was in college. Although, my history goes back to when we used to call it just gay rights before it was LGBTQ. Then it became lesbian and gay and GLBT. And, we added all these other groups into the movement that we now today, typically call LGBTQ. But personally, I'm on a crusade to kind of reduce some of that. I'm a big marketing geek, right? So I'm just trying to reduce it down. I'm thinking that we could I've seen iterations in Europe. There's now a trend for LGB and T to separate sexual orientation from gender orientation. I'm actually, I want to reduce it even further. I want to do Q plus T. I want to reduce it down to sexual orientation and gender orientation because it's getting long, right?
Yes, it is.
I mean, this whole thing. But, my early years were really fighting for basic human rights, AIDS advocacy. Long before we were fighting for the right to marry, we were fighting a lot of cultural stereotypes. And really, it's all the things that help to create a mainstream platform for what we consider to be our LGBTQ culture today. So beyond that, I also had more formal engagements. I worked in Central Mass on the Central Massachusetts Business Council, heading that up. That was sort of like a precursor to the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, right, here in Massachusetts and nationally. As a foster and adoptive parent, I had lots of engagement going back to the 90s. And that's, an interesting piece of sort of connection to this work because I've gotten to see a lot over the past 20 years in terms of how people are engaging. I volunteered with the Department of Children and Families to support gay and lesbian families in their pursuit to become foster and adoptive parents. Now, formerly as a family resource liaison, but years ago, it was just a phone call. And people had questions, I would be the person they would call. You were the go-to. Yeah. I was a DCF map trainer. So, part of that included sharing stories as a whole section. I know you're a map trainer as well, right? Yes. And that includes sharing stories. In 2009, I started and was elected to the board in Worcester, the Worcester West Area Advisory Board for DCF, and got to do a lot of work, and including work and engaging with the local community and doing some Pride work with Worcester Pride and Prides across the state. And then in other engagements, and because of that, I ended up engaging statewide with the DCF Commissioner Advisory Panel, the LGBTQ Liaison Support Group, and a number of other groups. So I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what our history has been here in Massachusetts, at least for the past couple of decades. And sometimes this volunteerism feels like a full-time job. I'm sure you feel the same. So tell me a little bit about your experience. Where are you coming from in all of this?
It's funny when I was talking to you about it and you mentioned it felt like a full-time job. I thought I better sit down and make myself a list of the work that we've been doing over the last 8 years or so I don't forget anything. But then also it's interesting just to look back on what we've done.
Right.
I realized that I think a lot of the work started up once my partner and I adopted.
Mm-hmm.
So we got hooked into Family Equality Council,
Right.
which is a national organization, and they have an office here in Boston. And they do a lot of advocacy, policy change, but they also host a lot of family events. And so we ended up attending their Family Week in Provincetown.
Right, yeah.
Which is so much
Big
fun.
annual fun week.
Yeah, it's fun activities for the kids and the family. There are classes and workshops for parents. And then when I started working for MARE, I was invited to go a couple of times and speak on panels about family planning and family building. So that was neat. So I've done a couple of events with them. And then through them, I met some other folks from organizations like the Hispanic Black Gay Coalition.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I am.
So they work with the Latinx and African-American community in Boston primarily. I'd done panels with them and then met some folks from Fenway Health.
Right.
Which,
huge player in the community.
Yeah, which is a go-to for not just LGBTQ adults, but their children as well. They actually have some adoption support groups now that they're offering.
Yeah, and a huge support for the trans community as well.
That's right, yep.
Fenway was, there's so many places now to access services, but for a long time, I feel like Fenway was one of the few places
They've always been at the forefront, you're right.
Where you're able to actually, especially as teens, young people, to really be able to access services.
Yeah, and I think if I recall correctly, some of their support groups are around trans issues from different angles. So, trans parents or parents of trans kids.
Right.
So something for everybody. So I did some work with those folks. And then, recently we had a speaker here from Speak Out Boston that I brought in to talk with the staff about her experience of coming to terms with her trans identity, and maybe not even necessarily for herself, but coming out as trans to the community and to her family and friends. And coworkers and so on and so forth. That was the second time that I'd had an experience with them. The first time I had invited a couple of speakers to come to the coalition meeting at a DCF office to talk to social workers. That was not that long ago, but it feels like we've already come so far in that regard that, social workers definitely are working with trans families and definitely matching trans families with kids, which is fantastic.
No, I think that's great. How did that connection evolve for you? Speak Out.
I think we had some trans families coming into the process who just felt wary, about not actually working with their family workers. That seemed to be actually going really well. But they were nervous they would never actually be placed with a child, that no one would actually select them. And so we just talked as a staff and decided, well, let's just do some education. Yeah.
Hey, listen, education's the way to address any issue, right? You can hit a wall head on, or you can find a way to open a door. And education is opening a door.
And I think at the time it was sort of a new topic in adoption for all of us. So everybody kind of felt on equal footing. And Speak Out Boston just does such a great job of picking really forthright but vulnerable speakers who just put you at ease and make you feel like you can say whatever you want to say. There's no stupid question.
The last speaker was fantastic.
Yeah, she was great.
I absolutely loved her. She did a great job.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's important for people, as we talk about with our staff training, right? We have a whole piece here, and I guess I'm jumping the gun a little bit because we're going to talk about HRC later, but we have a whole training that's set up around having a comfortable conversation about very uncomfortable things and getting people used to having the conversations. And I think that's the only way to get people over it.
Right.
Is to bring them in on the conversation and let people, we have a free space to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I mean, you and I even talk about the fact we make mistakes sometimes.
Right. Yeah. People have to try out the language.
It's hard.
Is new for most people.
It's hard sometimes to keep it all straight. And I am very well intentioned, and there are times that I misstep.
Yep.
But, one of the things I always say, one of the tenets of the training that we do is ABCs, right? Always be caring. If you're always coming from a position of caring, that comes off very different than if you're, kind of feeling disconnected or unplugged, or, it feels less harsh if you just, ask people. So I'm taking you off track, though. So you had Speak Out. So what else is going on?
I don't want to leave Boston Pride off the list, because we've had some great times at the Boston Pride Parade for the last few years. And the one year that I got to write a piece for the Pride Guide, that was really fun when they had an event downtown for all the local LGBTQ organizations. So
yeah, that's right. I think I might have actually, was I in that article? I think my family might have been in that article,
exactly.
right?
We had a photo of you.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I know. Well,
not all of you, unfortunately.
Just part of the
us. Family.
Hey,
but
listen, trying to get 9 people together all to take a picture these days is kind of crazy. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, and I think, we also, Rebecca, when she was, she was Clegg at the time, now Raposa, was handling our Central Mass area. She came out to Worcester Pride with me one year. We've got, people who are going to be out at Northampton Pride. There's North Shore Pride. There's, Cape Cod Pride. There's a lot going on during Pride Month, and we're very supportive of families for sure. So the funny thing is that I was thinking back over this whole experience, and I was like, prior to working for MARE, I met this amazing woman named Diane who was super knowledgeable and supportive of LGBTQ families at MARE. And that was, gosh, after years of engagement with the organization. I think we probably first met when you were, I think in a prior episode, you talked about the fact that you were a CSC or Child Service Coordinator prior to this role that you have now. And I think that's probably when we met. But, over the past 20 years, it's been a huge change in engagement. I know as gay parents, even as early as the 90s when we were going through training, and we actually met our first match happened at a MARE event at the Worcester Ecotarium, which I'm sure people are tired of me talking about. But that, was a point where we were a little bit tentative and hesitant. We hadn't worked with MARE before. Going back to the 90s, although Massachusetts, we were very fortunate to be in a state that allowed same-sex parents who at the time were not legally married, right, to both adopt. There was a lot in place. There was a lot of framework in place, but then yet we would call and 9 out of 10 kids would already have been placed magically, or, when they found out what our family constellation was. So we walked into it very tentatively. And even back then, MARE was super supportive. I mean, I think it made a big difference. Yeah, It made a big, big difference. But I want you to share with me a little bit about your experience in working with MARE, probably both from the Child Service Coordinator position and your current position, and talk a little bit about working with LGBTQ families, because I think that's a jumping off point between you and I. As my career changed here and at various points of engagement, we had that in common. And one thing that I've always been so proud to talk about is the fact that you know who your families are. Right. You know exactly what the needs are, and you advocate for all families. But today we're talking about Pride and LGBTQ families. So tell me a little bit about that whole process. How did all of this unfold? Tell me a little bit about how you manage all that.
So just interestingly enough, for people who are interested in numbers, we always have about 20% of LGBTQ-headed households when we do our statistics of families with whom kids are placed every year.
That's great.
Yeah, that number always hovers around between 20 and 22%, which is great. I mean, we do try to do more recruitment. We have events at More Than Words bookstores, the bookstores that employ kids who've been in DCF care or involved in the criminal justice system. And we're always looking, obviously, for more families to match the diversity of our kids. But I just think it's great that LGBTQ folks are choosing adoption as the way to start their family. Yeah. So I think for them, and this is what a lot of social workers have said, is that these folks are planful. Adoption is their choice. Becoming parents is a choice for them. They've researched it. They know what's ahead of them.
I've always said, so as a gay adoptive father, so if we break down the whole LGBTQ spectrum, I think it's fair to say that as gay fathers, our options are different than as lesbian couples, or all the various ways in which the family constellations, come together under the LGBTQ umbrella. And so for us, we had to either go the surrogacy route or adopt. Right. Whereas some of my our lesbian contemporaries at the time, going back to the 90s, they were looking at insemination. They were looking at biological options. We had a very different track. So I think that still plays out. I mean, that doesn't change. The political climate, the social climate doesn't change the biological pieces. And I think that does play into the decision making sometimes for families.
Yeah. Well, we all have our own internalized homophobia to a certain extent, our own fears. That we bring with us to the process. And, most of that 20% that I referred to are couples. And of the singles that are coming to us, the single gay women or gay men, the women, I think, don't face the same kind of trepidation because everybody thinks moms are, all women are going to be moms, and they're going to be maternal and nurturing, and that just is second nature to them. But we have lots of men that call us and actually express that they're nervous about calling an agency and somebody wondering about their motivations to become a parent, which is really sad, that it's not just seen as normal that you would want to be a parent in your life.
As good as we are at working, because you may or may not know someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, because we're just really good about working with people. I mean, I think is our agency, right? Speaking for MARE.
You try to work in a strength-based
But when
way.
you really, but when you really get out into the community, it's funny how many perceptions are still held about even same-sex couple male parenting.
Right. And we live in Massachusetts, and people are still holding on to these fears.
Yeah. And it's been described to me as a bubble within a bubble, and if we do have listeners nationally, you may be experiencing something a little bit different. Of course, we're talking about Massachusetts. We just recently had the conversion therapy ban passed. The bill was passed. There's been a lot of work by our legislature to make sure that we maintain equality for all citizens of the Commonwealth. But what's interesting is that as gay adoptive parents, some of the things we went through were the kinds of discrimination that gay men faced and just the kind of discrimination that men faced. We did have some of that going back to the 90s of, but why do you want to be a parent?
Yes.
What's going on with that? Why do you want to? And I think some of that still exists. I think
and it's very hard for two male parents to be out and about with their kids and kind of just quote unquote pass.
Right.
You're going to get a lot of attention. People are going to try to figure out your family, and we have so many families who are multicultural, multiracial.
Well, that was always our. So we had double questioning, I guess, right? So. Because we were gay men and we had a very, very visibly multiracial family, you could see people were just trying to figure it out. But what's really interesting? I'm so blind to it. I'm so blind to it. Unfortunately, I think
weren't.
no, but the kids actually became blind to it too. One of the things that we did is talk about the fact that so I grew up in a heteronormative, very middle class, blue collar working family who. For all intents and purposes, we're like, I'm making a reference that probably half the audience doesn't know, but the Cleavers, this idea of just this atomic family, right? Even with that, I didn't wear the right shoes. I didn't speak the right way. I didn't, you can be in the most normative situation and have, still have issues. And
other kids will still find the differences.
Yeah, so what my kids always learned was that it doesn't really matter who your family is. What's important is family, right? And so I don't think they really worried about it. I mean, we did deal with this particular topic is LGBTQ, families. And so, if we were talking about racial, sort of interactions based upon race, or if we were talking about, that's a different conversation. But I think in terms of being a family, man, a family is a family.
But that's a good point, because some people raise the question of the importance of kids having a male and female parent at home. And of course, we know that these kids just want families like any other kid, and that's what they deserve. And, families can look, obviously, a lot of different ways, but that also those male and female roles don't have to be fulfilled by the parents.
No.
They're going to have teachers, they're going to have babysitters, they're going to have aunts and uncles, they're going to have neighbors, they're going to have lots of males and females in their lives.
And they also don't need to be centered, they don't need to be sexually oriented, right? So it doesn't mean that a mother is going to be nurturing and a father is going to be the bad cop and the one who's, very, very, keeping kids on task. And,
Right.
I know plenty of families where it's a total flip. I think, gender roles today, talking about that as a whole separate topic, gender roles have changed a whole lot, right? So whether you are a biological family, an adopted family, you're heteronormative, you're LGBTQ identified, again, it's all certainly open to interpretation for sure. But man, you can get the support that you need in so many different ways. And often, single parents are the ones who come to me the most and say, I'm so jealous that you just have two parents. I don't ever get a break, right? So I know a lot of single parents who, who rely upon their family. And let's think about it. If we take this out of the context of adoption, when we look at things like divorce rates and single parent-headed households today, those numbers have gone up exponentially. So I don't think you can have the topical discussion just on LGBTQ parenting, right? I think it has to be part of a larger construct. But you do a lot of work with LGBTQ parents, as you said, 20 to 22%, pretty consistently over these past several years of the population that you work with in supporting families are LGBTQ identified. What message would you share with someone who, is just coming to terms with thinking about parenting, who may be LGBTQ identified? What kinds of tips over all these years of working with families would you share with them? Maybe questions that that they might have, or,
I think, this happens. This doesn't happen very often, but I still do have families who wonder if they should be honest from the get-go about their gender identity or sexual orientation. And of course, it's easy for me on the other end of the line to say, yeah, of course you would. Right. But because I personally know these social workers that they're going to be dealing with, and I know it's going to be okay, and I know that they really believe in their non-discrimination policy. But these people who are calling for the first time have faced discrimination in their lives. So, of course, they don't feel certain about it. And now this is something that they really want to happen. They want to become a parent. They want a child. So they're invested in it. And they're scared to put themselves out there. And, maybe they've already called other agencies and inquired about other kinds of adoption, international adoption, for example, where LGBTQ
and that's
people
that's a
haven't
very
always
difficult,
been welcome.
Right.
Yeah. And so maybe they have that experience in the back of their minds, or they've just, a lot of this is just word of mouth.
Well, it's also the media, big marketing geek that I am. If you read, and I do both professionally and personally read a lot of trade press, if you look at trade press from across the country, it's amazing what's going on. I mean, in terms of rolling back rights and, really the LGBTQ community is under attack very heavily in some areas. So if you read a lot of national media, mainstream media, the message you're getting is very inconsistent with the double bubble here in can I call it the double bubble? Like the bubble within the bubble here in Massachusetts?
That way. That's perfect.
No, but we're in a metropolitan area in Massachusetts. That's a very different engagement than somebody who's seeking to play this out in Tennessee, for example, or North Carolina, or
or
some
even
parts
for those folks here who aren't in a community where their friends have already adopted, where they may be the first. They just don't know. They don't have personal experience. They don't have somebody else's story to go on. And so that's a nerve-wracking call to make. And so I just spend time reassuring people that they're absolutely going to be welcome. I share with them the numbers because I think data is comforting to people.
Right.
Like, when I say 20%, I don't mean that 20% of the folks who call us every year identify as LGBTQ. I mean the 20% were placed with kids.
Where children were placed in their homes during that year.
Of the year, by the end of the year. And so that means they were, quote unquote, successful in this process, right? We want to get from A to Z.
Right.
And I think that makes people feel a little bit better. I will be really honest, I do still worry about the trans community. And not because I'm witnessing outright discrimination, but I think that there's still a lot of education that needs to happen there. We've had lesbian and gay folks and somewhat the bisexual community as well adopting for a long time. But this really still feels like new ground for the trans community. And so I really want to get that message out there that they're absolutely welcome and that we can point to families who've done it successfully. And we can pair them up, how we have the mentor-mentee program. Right. We've got now at least a small contingency of families that we can connect to each other.
It was like me in the old days with DCF. They're like, hey, you're a gay couple.
Can
you talk to other gay? But you don't know how many hundreds of calls that yielded, right?
I believe
I think your mentor-mentee program in much the same way offers that same level of support. And, there's another thing that I think an awful lot about when I can almost not talk about LGBTQ advocacy without thinking about the religious component that lies behind some of the anti-LGBTQ, sort of legislation and the movements. And one thing that I think is really important to point out, we've talked about Ricardo Franco, who works for your team many, many times in the past. And Ricardo is responsible, among other things, for plugging into the religious community. I mean, he stays very well connected. But you just did a podcast, and we have an awful lot of discussion about the intersectionality between LGBTQ families and religion. And that's a topic now.
Right.
And you actually just did a whole national national webinar on the intersectionality between LGBTQ families and religion.
Yeah, I mean, it points to that saying, we're more alike than we're unalike. And they don't have to be two separate cohorts. We don't have to look at them that way. There are religious and spiritual LGBTQ people, of course. Right. And then there are people for whom their gender identity or sexual orientation plays a more prominent role in their lives. But they also go to a place of worship once a week, and that's important to them too. So there's a lot of overlap there.
And I bring it up only because I think that sometimes that's what people have in mind when they think about adoption. They think about some of the institutions that sometimes are, agencies that work along with the state in this process. And we really tend to think very globally about this here. So that's LGBTQ adults. So now on the topic of LGBTQ youth, as I mentioned, so I work with both the DCF LGBTQ Liaison Committee and I've got some connections to the Mass Committee on LGBTQ Youth. And so from this work, I know a great deal about the state of LGBTQ youth in here, in care, not just in Mass, but nationally. There's also, unfortunately, some very tragic statistics associated with LGBTQ youth in care. For example, according to the statistics released in the most recent report by the Commission, the 2020 annual report, LGBTQ students were 1.7 times more likely to be bullied than other students. They skipped school at a rate of 3.5 times that of other students. Were more likely skip school at a rate of 3 times. Were more likely to be bullied than other students. They were 3.9 times more likely to attempt suicide. Had experienced sexual contact against their will at a rate that was 2.7 times other students. Experienced homelessness at a rate that was 2.8 times higher than other students. So, I mean, when we talk about outcomes, it's so important to keep in mind that these aren't students in foster care. These are just students in general, and it was the way that the study was conducted. So, of course, at MARE, we're pleased not only to profess support for LGBTQ families and youth, but we also have our HRC, or Human Rights Campaign, All Children, All Families certification, and that means that our leadership and staff have met the standards of training and development required to provide meaningful education to LGBTQ children and families. It's an ongoing requirement, and it means that we have to attend regular training and prove that we meet the standards of inclusion. Thoughts about HRC? I mean, we use them a lot as a resource. What about for families who have questions, want to think about HRC as a way to begin to educate themselves? Do you have any thoughts about what they can look for and how HRC can help to support them?
I mean, if you haven't been on the HRC website before, I would encourage you to go on. They've got a great list of resources and referrals and supports. And I don't just mean adoption specific. So all kinds of services or supports you might need in your life, which might be different from when you're an individual to when you become a parent or a family. And you might be looking for some other things. They've just got a long list there. They also do a fantastic job of tracking data. So again, for people who are looking for more numbers, it makes people feel less alone. Right. So they can provide that. And they've got they've got sample forms on there, or templates, if you will, that are examples of using inclusive language and how to do that. And
so important.
It really is. So say you become a parent and you notice that your child's medical form, for example, at school is not as inclusive as it
says mother and father.
Right. and the simple fix is parent 1, parent 2, right? Or the old parent or guardian form that really is the most inclusive of all. Printing that out and just providing that to the school and saying like,
could you replace that?
It might feel like a small change to you, but it would mean a lot to me. Would you replace that? So they've got those kinds of things on there.
Certainly guides, a lot of guides, a lot of service information. So I think HRC is a great resource. Family Equality Council, someone else that does a lot of work. They actually have a place where I know you can submit forms if you have a form that is not inclusive. They will kind of help you work through that, right? So
you can share your photo, your family photo and story as well, which is nice. They do a lot of community building. They have local chapters. They have a lot of local events. So you can check that out when you're looking to do something. And it's all family friendly. So that's really nice too, because yes, you need to get out and meet other adults going through the same parenting challenges as you. But it's also good for your kids to see other kids with families that look like theirs. Yeah,
that's interesting because, so for years, with all of my engagement up through the Central Massachusetts Business Council, we had a lot of very grassroots, in-person kinds of meetings. And even in those early days, my engagement with DCF started during that time. We were looking to help the department build families within the LGBTQ, or back then it was probably the LGB or LGBT community, right, going back 20 years. But at that point, something shifted and we started becoming more virtual. And it wasn't until probably 2007, 2008, as I was doing community work, that families started saying to me, you know what, it's great that we got married and I'm glad that we can go to school and we are being accepted in most communities. I'm not speaking for everyone. But we no longer have a sense of our community, and our kids don't see other families like ours. And so there's been a big movement. I've been part of it. I do work with gay adopted fathers and mothers groups, and we have meetups and events so that families can get together. People are finding the value in that again. And I think, family equality, you mentioned Family Week, that's coming up.
Yeah, one thing July. I thought was neat when the times that I went with the kids is that it actually fostered conversation that we hadn't had on our own or thought to have on our own.
Right.
And shame on us. But, so for example, we took it for granted that a friend of ours who's a single mom had her daughters through the help of a donor.
Right.
So it's like, wait, I've never talked to my kids about this. This is a great opportunity to have this conversation. And I think it helps with that feeling of otherness that all kids have at some point, like you were talking about.
Well, I think every kid
have that.
Every kid, no matter what the circumstance.
Her family was built in a totally different way than ours,
But just like we like to be around people who have similar thoughts and ideas, so too do kids.
Right.
So with all that in mind, what can you share about your engagement with the department when identifying LGBTQ youth or supportive resources? I mean, we certainly don't believe that LGBTQ youth have to be placed with LGBTQ families any more than, we believe that children who are non-LGBTQ shouldn't be, right? So, I mean, it's not about this direct match. And I think sometimes people think about it that way. But when we talk about LGBTQ youth in care, what has your experience been? Are you finding that they're identified? Or, I can certainly talk to my experience outside of the MARE work, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'd obviously like to see more identification. I'd like to see more discussion happening between social workers in terms of referrals and MARE about a child's gender identity or sexual orientation, or even questioning that might be coming up for them, just because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is good matching.
Yeah,
it's
for
all
sure.
about what's in the child's
parents'
best
strengths,
interest.
child's needs.
Right. So we can do way better matching when we have way more information.
Right.
So I put that in that category. But I will say I agree with you. The fit does not have to be LGBTQ child with LGBTQ family. And I think we shouldn't do that for the sake of convenience, because the truth is that the community does step up a lot.
100%.
When they hear that a child is in need of a placement, they do. And that's terrific. But the numbers just don't match. We need more families that are open.
Right.
And are educated enough to really do a good job of it. So I'm happy to see that the MAP curriculum in terms of LGBTQ issues has been expanded a bit. And I've been seeing an increase in the number of home studies coming in from families who are open. And I always think that something we can't underestimate is those families who are looking for young children but still make a point of saying they'd be open to a child of any identity, is because we don't know. We never know.
Well, there's no guarantee. I mean, listen, it's one thing to have. I worry about the kid. So I 100% agree. LGBTQ identified children do not have to be matched with LGBTQ identified parents. That may be the case sometimes.
Right.
But what we need to do is make sure that the parents' strengths are identified, right? So not everyone's going to be good at caring for a medically complex kid.
Yes.
Not every child is going to be great. Not every parent is going to be willing or great at providing deep religious, connection for a child. Not everyone is going to be, good at dealing with everything. And so strength-based matching is really just about, thinking about and challenging yourself to think about that which you have that can help to meet a child's needs, right?
Yes.
And I think we just have to be on top of it. And I think one of the things that is most concerning for me about children in care is that, think about a kid who's in care. So you've been removed from your parents. You are now living with a family who, sees you one particular way. And now all of a sudden you're coming to understand that you might have a different identity. And, what is that going to be like? And so I think the system has to be receptive, educated, and able to handle those kinds of conversations. And I don't really know if we do that well. I've not really seen any statistics. So, I'm trying to always be very objective about this. But I think that every system can improve. I know we've been doing a lot of work here at MARE, to help improve. And so things like HRC certification, the All Children, All Families certification is a way to get at that. The department I had mentioned the DCF LGBTQ Liaison Committee, and back in 2015, that group put together the DCF LGBTQ Guide to Working with Youth and Families, something that we have available and that's now available on the website for DCF. But I think, you talked a lot about working with, prospective families earlier. We're certainly open to working with families. I think one of the things that we can do is help to maybe provide some resources for folks. So we talked about HRC, right? Human Rights Campaign, and they can be reached at hrc.org.
PFLAG, the Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays at pflag.org.
Right. And GLAD, Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, and they are a group that works with people who need support in the community, right? Who need some sort of legal advice or legal support. They're available at glad.org.
The Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ Youth, that's on mass.gov, specifically at /orgs/Massachusetts -commission-on-LGBTQ-youth. We should share this.
I did
we'll
that.
Share this.
I did that to you. If you go to mass.gov and put in Mass Commission on LGBTQ Youth, or you can just Google search Mass Commission on LGBTQ Youth, it comes up. And of course, Family Equality Council, we mentioned, they're familyequality.org. There's so many resources available. And to my mind, those are some of the very forward-facing resources. Of course, for people who want more information about adoption in general, they can look to our website. They can look to Adopt US Kids. There's a lot of resources available. We did use a lot of terms today. So we try and make sure that we define as much as possible for our audience. So let's discuss a couple of terms. We can kind of go back and forth. LGBTQ, it's an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. It's a more commonly used term that replaces LGBT. And it can also include the letters IAA, which stands for intersex, asexual. And then the last A sometimes is accepting, sometimes is ally. It really depends where you look. But that's a pretty common acronym.
Right. And then some of the organizations, of course, we use their acronyms as well. HRC is the Human Rights Campaign. This is a national organization that does advocacy and policy work and has a lot of great resources on its site, as well as FEC, which is the Family Equality Council. They also are a national organization. They've got a chapter right here in Boston.
PFLAG, I think, is probably the other one from the top of the list. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did talk about GLAAD. PFLAG, as you said, is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and that's a longstanding organization. I know PFLAG from, some of my grassroots work back in the 90s. Right. They've been around for a long time, and they're a wonderful support for folks who are sort of directly in the LGBTQ community, but are in the orbit of people in the LGBTQ community. They can be a wonderful resource for family members and friends and caring people who want to really be, part of understanding.
No, I know. I'm laughing because I feel like that's the part of the coming out process is you come out to your parents and then you hand them
the PFLAG brochure.
Just call these folks. They'll help you.
if you need help. Of course, we talked about the Mass Commission on LGBTQ Youth, and they are a commission that was established by law as an independent agency of the Commonwealth to recommend to all branches of state government effective policies, programs, and resources for youth to thrive. And as a matter of fact, I just attended their event where they kicked off their 2020 report and sharing it. It's a fantastic report that includes recommendations to all the state agencies on how they can be more inclusive of LGBTQ youth, talk about key disparities, and it's an amazing report. So you'll find a link for that at Mass Committee on LGBTQ Youth. What else did we miss? I think we got through most of it as we were reading through the notes. I think we pretty much hit anything. If we haven't hit something, you can always email me at joes@mareinc.org, and I'll be happy to answer your question for you.
I'd just do a shout out for More Than Words.
Oh, right.
The bookstore we mentioned, which employs kids who've been in DCF care or state custody or involved in the criminal justice system, and now are learning job skills.
Right.
And moving on to bigger and better things.
Okay. Great. Well, of course, you know how much I enjoy working with you, and I'm so glad that we got to spend this time together on the podcast, and I'm grateful for our joint work supporting LGBTQ youth in this process. So thank you so much for joining me today.
It's always fun. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back to introduce you to a few waiting children right after this short break. Hey, producer Jeremy.
Hey, host Joe.
So while we're between segments, we really should remind folks that one of the best ways to support our work and to support children waiting in foster care is to share resources, whether it's social media, the web, or even this podcast.
Yeah, that's so true. So to all of our loyal listeners out there, we know there are many of you. If you like the AdoptED podcast, like us, comment on your platform of choice, whether that's Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget to rate us on iTunes and the Google Play Store. We really appreciate those 5-star ratings.
And good comments. And don't forget to share us with your friends and family. They'll love us too.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. This is probably a good time to remind our listeners that they can find information about any of our waiting children at our website, mareinc.org, by clicking on the Meet the Children tab and selecting Waiting Children. You can then search by a child's registration number, view waiting children, or create a custom match. So Diane, tell me more about our featured waiting children.
Sure. Let's start with Jaden. He's 8 years old. He's very playful, energetic. He's African American and Caucasian. Those who know him well say he's incredibly bright, he's sociable, he's kind, he's affectionate.
He's got a cute little smile.
Doesn't he, though? Look at that sweater, too. Well, he loves attending church or Sunday school. Doesn't he look like he's wearing his Sunday best?
That's great. And that's an example of, looking for matches where somebody can support that, right?
That's right.
Okay. So, Jaden, if you want more information about Jaden, did we give the number?
His registration number is 7284.
All right. And then family constellation-wise? for Jaden?
Sure. It'd be great if Jaden had a family where he's an only child, or at least a family that can give him a lot of individualized attention. He has a lot of interests, and he really wants parents who are going to engage with him.
That's important. Okay, great. Great
He's
strengths.
legally free. That's important to mention. Legally free for adoption.
So for anyone interested in learning more, let's remind them what the process is like.
Sure. Just hop on our website, mareinc.org, or you could call us at 617-964-6273. We've also have a list of events on our website, and you could attend an event and
I think our next big
talk
one
to us
is
in person.
probably Assumption.
That's
is
right.
probably our next big open
July.
event.
Yep.
Great. Hey, producer Jeremy.
Hey, host Joe.
We have an event coming up next month, and I think a lot of families and social workers might be interested in it. Have you ever been to the Assumption event?
I actually haven't. As long as I've been around MARE, it hasn't come around the rotation.
We haven't had one.
For it.
Yeah, we haven't had one in a couple of years. So this is one of our signature events, and usually it happens every other year. It's great for families to come and learn more about the process of adopting from foster care, as well as meeting workers and waiting children. So this venue, though, is kind of a really easy vibe. It's indoor, it's outdoor. It's a bit of a different feel than Options. Sometimes people, you've been to Options many times, and it's a sort of an indoor space, and there's lots of people. This is at a college. There are indoor portions, but it's also out on a field. So, just a bit of a different feel. And I bring that up only because sometimes families associate with one type of event versus another. So this one's kind of easygoing and fun. Of course, we're so pleased that both events are sponsored by our friends at Jordan's Furniture. But why don't you tell everyone about the details?
Yeah, so this is a really unique event because for families, this is really an opportunity. It's kind of a combo. There's training in the morning that starts at 8:30. And so that's a whole panel presentation with breakout sessions where you can really learn a lot about this process and get more information. And then that goes directly into more of our standard adoption party.
Right.
Going from 12 to 3. And that's the outdoor portion.
That's so much fun.
Where there's bouncy houses and all sorts of interesting stuff to do. I understand there's a dance troupe.
There is a dance troupe. They are fantastic.
Right. So yeah, it's going to be a really fun day if you're looking for a very fun and light adoption party to come to. This would be a really great option, I think.
Great. Well, where do they need to go to register?
To register, you just need to go to www.mareinc.org, and in the events section, you'll find out all you need to know about the Summer Adoption Mixer at Assumption College is the official title.
And that's happening on July 13th, so we hope you can join us. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, you bet.
Hey, guys, hope to see you there. Welcome back to AdoptED. This is our Adopt Talk segment where we get to meet community members who are involved in the foster care and adoption process. Joining me today is Richard Benoit, a foster and adoptive parent, LGBTQ advocate, and community support resource. In his role as a foster parent liaison, he works with parents in the community to provide support and guidance. We're pleased that you're available to speak with us. And do you prefer Richard, Rich, Rick?
Rich is fine.
Thanks. Can I say Rick?
Yes.
Thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So, I think you and I could talk for days about today's topic. It's Pride Month. Happy Pride. And you and I have done a lot of work in the community for a number of years, and actually met as gay foster adoptive parents many years ago. And I know, for Tom and I, we looked at all different kinds of ways of becoming a family: surrogacy and international adoption, and all the various ways, and domestic adoption and so forth. And we landed on adoption from foster care. For you,
it was the same thing. Looking at the process, what that process entailed. Both financially and timeline-wise. The other thing, too, is at that time, the agencies, if they were receptive or not.
Yeah. Who were those agencies for you? Did you look at private? I know we sort of eventually got to DCF.
Right.
right?
Yes.
But did you do your training with DCF or did you use another agency?
I training with DCF.
You did? Okay. And MAP class back then was very different.
Yeah, very.
Right? It was a different journey. What was your training experience like? I mean, we were the only gay couple that I knew of having children when we started this. A lot of our friends weren't necessarily interested in forming a family and doing this. Did you, what was your training experience like? What was the community like for you at the time? Because you were ahead of me by a couple of years.
I want to use a terminology, shock and awe. There is about 10 couples. We were one of 2 gay couples.
Really?
At that time.
Okay. I was expecting more resistance. Did you find a lot of resistance in the process?
I don't know if it was what I found was resistance. I think more of shock.
Okay.
The facial expressions, the tone, the statements of, you sure you really want to do this? We know why we're here. Do you know why you're here?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. For us, the tougher part came when we started matching.
True.
And really getting out into the community. I have to say that not long after we started this process, within a couple of years, the department did a lot of work to make sure that all people felt engaged in the process, really started to look at practices and make sure that everyone, was getting equal treatment as you can and as best you can with a large bureaucratic organization, right?
Agree.
But I think it was different back then. Although what's interesting is...
I do too.
Yeah. But by and large, it was no more or no less challenging than I hear from a lot of couples or single adoptive parents who engage in this process. It was... it had its challenges, but its challenges weren't necessarily because of who we were. The challenges are just inherent in, adoption in general. But you had a bit of a unique experience. I remember your first match, right? How did that come about?
I was part of an organization called Safe Homes. They're based out of Worcester. And at that time, they were affiliated with U Inc.
Right.
They ran a program for LGBTQ youth. And those youth came from multiple resources, some from the department. Mike at that time was part of the department's system and U Inc. system. I had met him through the program on a weekly basis. I was approached if I would be interested in having him come to live with us as a foster child. Right. And we slowly but surely developed a friendship, and then to see if we were going to go forward, which eventually we did.
Right, because he was a teen, obviously.
Yes, 16.
Right. Yeah, and you did move forward with that?
Yeah, I did.
And have since moved forward with how many others?
Total of 5.
So that's interesting.
Right.
So today, we have this conversation about LGBTQ youth on the department side and how we make connections to supportive resources. And I always say LGBTQ youth do not have to be placed with LGBTQ families.
I
right?
agree.
Have to be placed with supportive resources, and any more than non-LGBTQ youth couldn't be placed with LGBTQ families. Obviously,
right.
We're open as long as everyone is aligned well, and as long as
everybody's receptive.
Yeah, and everybody's good. But that's interesting that's how you met, because I think today I get questions all the time from LGBTQ families who are looking to be a resource provider for an LGBTQ youth. I mean, my family, as you know, has been open and receptive and willing to look at LGBTQ youth who may need placement, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of families who do that. What do you think the landscape looks like today? What do you think, how do you think those connections are being made, between waiting kids and families? Has it changed a lot?
I think yes, I think it has. I think the LGBTQ youth have more layers than they had previously. 20 years ago, there was a simple question, gay or lesbian.
Right.
Today, with the dynamics and the layers, it does look differently. You're not just looking at either a lesbian child or youth or a gay. You're looking at the potential of a bisexual child, a trans child, and the list goes on.
Right.
So that the dynamics and the personality and the needs of that child, I think,
very different.
I think they are very different.
More complex, for sure.
I agree. Good word.
And how about connecting to families? Do you have a sense from your community work of families that are saying, "Hey, I'd love to be a resource or a parent to an LGBTQ identified youth"? Have you come across any folks that have opened their doors or made themselves available to match with those youth?
I think there are couples out there that are very open and receptive to that need. The issue is, again, the diversity of what the need is.
Sure. Yeah, and I think one of the things working with the board, so Rick and I, for disclosure, serve together on the DCF Worcester West Area Advisory Board and have done a lot of community work together around LGBTQ support. But even before that, we actually served on the Central Massachusetts Business Council together, right? And in our group, I think I was probably president at the time, and I think Tim, our buddy Tim, was VP, and we saw a need, early 2000s, right? To find a way for families to be enculturated into Pride. At that time, Worcester Pride was very much for an older crowd. It wasn't necessarily terribly family friendly.
Right.
And we brought up that first hybrid event where we took a big chunk of Water Street and had sort of the CNBC was LGBTQ and LGBTQ-friendly businesses getting together, right?
Right.
But we found a way to also have conversations with other agencies. DCF was one of them. Mike Whalen.
Yeah.
Remember Mike Whalen?
Yeah.
Right?
Great
Came
guy.
out, and out of Boston, there was some work being done. They said, hey, we really want to make sure that people know that we're open to all families, right? And LGBTQ identified, singles and couples and, are all part of who we'd love to talk to. And that's the first time I really remember there being a family focus in our area in Worcester for this work.
Yes.
So I think, so with that in mind, rolling it forward to the board, people started coming to us probably in, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there was a point where marriage equality had taken hold. All the support groups, I mean, the groups like CNBC and the others seemed to kind of just evaporate. But then at some point, I don't know, I want to say 07, 08, people started coming to you. I know people started coming to me and saying, what's going on with LGBTQ foster care and adoption? How do we get involved? I feel like we kind of lost the focus. And so we took some action and created the LGBTQ committee.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Part of the board.
Yeah. And why was that important?
I think it was important on multiple levels. Number one, informational for people that did not know exactly where we were as a community, where the service providers that service within that community, where they all stood. I think it was also important that families that were looking into supporting youth or kids know that there were multiple layers of resources and systems that were doing some really special stuff within the school system, stuff within the mental health system, along with Safe Homes, that still is incredibly successful for the community and for the youth. But again, the diversity of what those layers looked like, the education piece needed to be implemented, and that is where it kind of got lost.
There's a lot of intersectionality. I mean, at the very front of this is, can I be a parent or can we be parents?
And what does that look like?
What does that look like? And then can we be parents? Yes. Can we be parents to an LGBTQ youth or a non-LGBTQ youth? Yes.
And what does that
what does that look like? Now, exactly. Now we have to go through training. And what does that look like?
Right.
So, and then you're right. Then there's placement. So then it's, it's funny. We talk about, I think we talk, especially during Pride Month, we're talking about LGBTQ parenting, right?
Yep.
As a way to just remind people that here in Massachusetts, it's an option. And so some of it just became, you're right, some of it just became the same conversation we had with any other group of people.
Right.
Right? And some of it was specific to LGBTQ parents.
Right.
But I think what's interesting is they, as a group, LGBTQ parents came to us and said, we used to have all of these community groups, and we used to have, now, it's great that we're integrated into our communities, but our kids don't get to be around other kids like ours, and right? So what do we do? How do we address that?
Networking. Who are the other people that are within the system?
Right.
Working within the system to identify who are the other people out there, raising the same type of youth and the challenges of those youth as a family.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean, even though it's Pride Month and even though we're talking about LGBTQ, raising a child is raising a child. Challenges of raising a child is the challenges. But it's another layer again that we talk about is how do we bring supports for that particular child with additional challenges. And again, networking within the system and not networking on events and support groups and stuff like that, where you hear more of what type of children are you raising, how do you deal and address those particular challenges.
Yeah.
One of the other outreach areas and groups in which I belong to is a group called Caring Families Together. Again, that particular group, when we go into the fall and we do an apple picking, there is 45 to 50 parents with their kids. We're all on basically the same level, but this is a phenomenal way to network. How do you handle this? And, you're picking an apple, and the next thing you know, you're talking about a challenge with a particular child or how you're raising them. I think it's really important
kids
to feel
see
connected, and kids
other families like theirs
that look just like us.
Right. No, I think it's important, and I think that's a great example too of meeting today's needs. Right, there's a virtual piece, right? It's a Facebook interaction, but then there's also in-person pieces and meetups, and so we've had a lot of success, I think, with getting people together. And there's offshoots, there's luncheon meetings where parents get together while kids are in school, and
which we have one.
And people have made friendships, and they go off and do other things, and I think that's so important. Again, back to the point about Diane and the mentor-mentee program at MARE. I think it's important to know that, having a connection, whatever your connection is, or even Mary Viano was with me, Mary Viano from PAL, and she was talking about sort of like ages and stages and things that, that go on, and how you are in and out of crisis sometimes. And, it may be different people that you need to talk to, but having somebody who can meet you where you're at, that's the language I use now, finding people to meet you where you're at. If you're in the middle of crisis mode, another parent who's been through that can be very, very helpful. If you are an LGBTQ parent, another parent who, has had similar challenges, or sometimes not even, you're an LGBTQ parent and you have an IEP issue. Well, having another parent with IEP experience can be helpful, right? It's meeting you where you're at, meeting your specific needs, meeting you where you're at, all very important stuff, regardless of, of who you are or how you identify.
And you're not alone.
Right.
That's the big key. I think the connection for our kids, for us, we are part of a much bigger community.
So what do you see the challenges being today? I mean, we kind of have gone through a bit of a historical perspective on all of this, and the challenges have been up and down. I mean, I know things change sometimes with political climate and social climate, and there's lots of challenges and changes. What do you think for LGBTQ youth and families today? What do you think those challenges look like?
I think the challenges are very basic: education, resources. There are always going to be questions for adults on how to parent. Always.
There are, and here's the thing. We talk an awful lot here at MARE, and we've talked on the podcast about a variety of different needs. So we have children sometimes with social or emotional needs, with intellectual disabilities, with, extreme physical needs. And there are subsets of people who very much have a focus on all of that. And so much like LGBTQ as another lens into all of this, right? But I think at the end of the day, no matter what your affiliation is or where you start from, there are parts of this process that are just kids being kids, about foster kids and adoptive kids having challenges sometimes that are different because of where they came from, and having nothing to do with what brought you in the door to begin with.
Right. But I also see that as the children piece truly correct, but there's also an adult parenting. If this is your first time being a parent, the questions of, am I doing this right?
Right. No matter what your starting point is, parenting is still parenting, right?
And the challenges are still there.
Yeah, I agree.
The inner questions of, have I done this particular situation correctly? Am I handling it right? Am I using this right terminology? Am I the only one out here? I think those also are constantly changing, but also not. The questions and the concerns might be changing, but the core piece of...
Well, there's a core piece that lives within any foster and adoptive family.
Yeah,
and any biological family.
I agree.
Because sometimes, I always go back to sometimes a kid's just being a kid.
Right.
And sometimes it bumps into other things, right?
Yep.
And sometimes it doesn't. Well, Rick, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure spending time with you today. Thank you for sharing your story. And I'm sure our listeners learned a lot, about you and your journey and what's available in the community. So thanks again for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well, for more information about MARE, including resources for LGBTQ parents and children, or to learn about our waiting children, or simply get more info about how you can get involved in supporting waiting children, please visit us at mareinc.org or call us at 617-964-6273. This is Joe Santagato for MARE, wishing you a wonderful day, and thanks for listening. Until next time.